I'm excited to welcome you to the absolute best video on Tailwind CSS you're going to find anywhere on YouTube. This video is a comprehensive full course that covers every single detail you need to know to master Tailwind. Unlike other tutorials that just talk over code, my teaching style is interactive and visual to ensure you remain engaged in order to maximize your learning. I use colorful diagrams and animations to break down the theory in an easy to understand way, as well as walk you through its application step by step in a real-world project. So let's jump in. So first of all, a big word of warning. Do not touch CSS frameworks until you have a solid understanding of CSS fundamentals. Now, when I started out, I was so eager to use CSS frameworks that I jumped into them straight away without fully mastering CSS. And it just becomes a very frustrating experience, because you just can't work with CSS frameworks until you really understand the fundamentals of CSS. So to understand this a bit more, we have our web page, and we know that the core of our web page is built in HTML, that is, all the content. CSS is then a layer that sits on top of HTML, and you need to know HTML to work with CSS. CSS is all about the styling of HTML elements, and if you don't know about HTML elements, you can't style them. It's the same thing with CSS frameworks. They're a layer that sits on top of CSS, and you need to know CSS to work with frameworks. Just like you couldn't work with CSS without knowing about HTML, the same thing is true with CSS frameworks. You just won't be able to use them properly without understanding CSS properly. Now, this Tailwind course is designed for absolute beginners. But as I have mentioned, you need to have a solid foundation in CSS, which includes understanding the CSS box model and working with layout techniques like Flexbox and CSS Grid, as well as responsive design with media queries. If you aren't confident in CSS fundamentals, I strongly recommend you take my CSS full course first. It's available for free on my channel, and you can check it out in the description below. I know it's a longer journey to eventually get to a framework, but I promise you it will make your life much easier. So what is a CSS framework? A CSS framework is a ready-made collection of CSS code to simplify and speed up the process of styling web pages. To understand this, let's look at different ways we could build a cupboard. The cupboard is an analogy for a web page. Now, to build a cupboard, we need to work with raw materials. With wooden planks and screws, this represents CSS code. Now, the first way you could build your cupboard is use the raw materials to build it yourself. You could go to the hardware store, buy some wood, some nails, and some other pieces to build your cupboard. But an easier way to do this is going to a store like IKEA. And IKEA represents our framework. For anyone that doesn't have IKEA in their country, IKEA is a very popular furniture store where you can buy items for your home. So say, for example, a cupboard. Let's say we wanted to build this cupboard here. You would go to IKEA and you would purchase a flat pack of materials. If I go over here, product details, assembly and documents, assembly instructions, your flat pack would contain the large wooden pieces and all the bits needed to build the cupboard, like these big and small screws. And you're provided instructions with how to build the cupboard. So with IKEA, raw materials are packaged up by IKEA, and then we use IKEA parts and instructions to build the cupboard. So through this analogy, you can see how using a framework can be a much faster and efficient way of building a cupboard versus doing it yourself from raw materials. Before we jump into Tailwind, I want to give you an overview of the different types of CSS frameworks out there. CSS frameworks are built around core philosophies. There are three main types of CSS frameworks. The first is component-based. This is where the framework provides ready-made UI parts. These parts are responsive, so out the box, they're ready for all screen sizes and often contain JavaScript in them. So they are a lot more interactive and respond to user actions. An example of a component is something like a button, where in this class here, we have btn and btn primary, and with these two lines of code, we would be given a button that's already styled for us. The most popular component-based CSS framework is Bootstrap. If you're interested in learning Bootstrap after mastering Tailwind, you can check out my Bootstrap video in the description below. The next type of framework is utility-based. Utilities are simple classes for styling. You can see an example of a utility here, MB-8. This stands for margin bottom, and the number 8 represents a particular rem value. And for margin bottom, the values would be MB1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc. where each number represents a rem value which is provided in the documentation of the framework. A very popular utility-based framework is Tailwind CSS, which is the focus of this video. The final type of CSS framework is CSS in JavaScript. This is where you can work with CSS directly inside JavaScript. Now at this point, that may not make too much sense, but the reason this is helpful is because in a language like React, being able to use CSS inside JavaScript effectively allows you to write HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all within the same document. Now again, that won't make too much sense right now. For now, you just need to know that CSS in JavaScript is just another type of framework. And just to show you, here's a snippet of what it would look like. And again, don't worry at all about the syntax. A very popular CSS in JavaScript framework is styled components. I teach styled components as part of my full stack web development bootcamp during the React topic, and you can learn more about this in the description below. Now, just a small comment, I don't know what's up with this logo. Why is nail polishing the logo for this? I just don't get it. Anyway, one thing you're going to quickly learn in the development community is that it's very quick to learn which tools only have developers on their team, because their logos just kind of suck. Anyway, nowadays, the frameworks integrate core features from other approaches for more flexibility. So while something like Bootstrapped is at its core component-based, there are still utilities available. And the same thing with Tailwind. At its core, it is utility-based, but there also are components available. So now that you've got a good understanding of what a CSS framework is, let's now look at Tailwind in more detail. So what is Tailwind? Tailwind is a utility-first CSS framework for creating custom responsive designs with predefined low-level styles. So let's look at some keywords here. Utility first is the core philosophy of Tailwind, where utilities form the foundation of the framework. Responsive refers to the framework being inbuilt to handle all devices. The word predefined means that the special classes we use are systemized, and we're going to see how this works soon. Finally, the word low level means that our utility classes are just single properties, so things like color, font size, or margin. Tailwind CSS is becoming very popular, and for good reason. It's an incredibly powerful and versatile framework. So let's start by taking an initial look at Tailwind CSS, which you can find at tailwindcss.com. Now, something I want to highlight right away is that we'll be using a different version of Tailwind in this course. At the time of recording, the latest version is version 4.1. You can see over here. However, for this course, I'm actually going to be using the previous version, version 3.4.17, which looks like this. Let me explain why I'm doing this. This course is specifically designed for absolute beginners, not just to Tailwind, but to web development in general. We're soon going to be looking at more detail at how you install Tailwind, but if I head over to Docs and Installation, you can see there are different techniques over here. Now in a professional project, this is how you install Tailwind, using a command line and something called Node Package Manager, NPM for short. This is part of a more advanced development setup and is probably something you haven't used yet. But this is effectively installing Tailwind directly into your project. In this course, we'll be using a much simpler installation method called the Play CDN, which allows us to jump into writing Tailwind without needing to install anything. The reason I'm sticking with this previous version is because the newer version, 4.1, assumes you've installed Tailwind using this more advanced setup. And this can actually make parts of the documentation on the newer version quite confusing. I do want to reassure you, everything we learn on this previous version, 3.4.17, is fully transferable onto version 4. Nothing has changed with the fundamentals. We're just using a version that's a little bit more beginner friendly. So I do recommend switching your version to version 3.4.17 so you can follow along with me step by step and see exactly what I'm seeing. On the Tailwind showcase page, you can see some major applications using Tailwind. OpenAI and ChatGPT use Tailwind, and Shopify, which is one of the world's biggest e-commerce platform, is also using Tailwind. And you can see down here are some smaller applications that are also using Tailwind as their CSS framework of choice. So Tailwind is used by very large companies and smaller companies. Alright, so Tailwind is available at tailwindcss.com. I'm going to head over to Docs, and before we look at these in detail, on this left navigation bar, I want to scroll down to Core Concepts and click on this title, Utility First Fundamentals, to give you an idea of how Tailwind works and how powerful it is. So let's read this together. Traditionally, whenever you want to style something on the web, you write CSS. In this setup here, The documentation is showing us using a traditional approach where custom designs require custom CSS. So this chat component here, we would have our HTML markup, we would set a whole bunch of different classes, and then in our CSS document, we would style all of these different classes to achieve this design. Now let's compare this to how we write this in Tailwind. Tailwind uses utility classes to build custom designs without writing CSS. So this same component is just coded up over here. This is it. The CSS is contained in these different utilities. So for example, BG white refers to the background being white. Over here, text XL is extra large text. So this is a bit interesting. We're kind of writing our CSS inside our HTML. And this might seem counterintuitive to this being useful, because the general rule of thumb is you want your CSS in a separate style sheet. But by using a framework like Tailwind, where styles are systemized, this drastically simplifies our code. You can see we've built the exact same component as above, but the amount of code has drastically reduced. So why is Tailwind helpful? Tailwind overcomes limitations of traditional CSS frameworks and custom CSS by providing more flexibility and customization. Looking at an example component written in CSS, I want to look at 4 reasons why Tailwind is helpful. The first is reusability and consistency. Reusable utilities and design settings ensure a consistent and easy to manage design. So for example, you can see this paragraph has a utility class TextSlate 500. You can see the button has the color TextPurple 600. These are inbuilt styles inside Tailwind, where these classes are reusable throughout the page and provide consistency. The second reason Tailwind is helpful is it helps reducing context switching. By this I mean that styling directly in HTML minimizes the need to switch between HTML and CSS files. So for example, this paragraph over here has large black text which is semi-bold. We don't need to flip between a CSS and HTML file, we can see it all in one place. The third reason is that we're avoiding pre-designed styles. We use low-level utilities allowing for custom designs without needing to override pre-designed components. If you've ever worked with Bootstrap, you'll know you'll often have to customize Bootstrap components. And this can be very frustrating as it requires custom styles in a separate style sheet and gets really messy. So by using low-level utilities, that is single property utilities, we never have to go and add our own custom CSS. The Tailwind framework gives us everything in the toolbox we need. For example, this button class has a lot of different styles applied to it. There's some padding, rounding corners, and much more. The final reason is that Tailwind helps simplifying responsive design. Tailwind has built-in responsive and mobile-first utilities, making it easy to create layouts that adapt seamlessly across different devices. To show you an example of this utility class sm::textLeft, where sm: is a special Tailwind responsive utility that's easily applied and avoids us writing more complex media queries. And we'll learn more about this in the project we build. So in a nutshell, Tailwind is just great. I'm a big fan of it because I love their approach, and they're also really slick with how they've designed their documentation and how they've systemized their components. Alright, so let's take a look at the homepage project we're going to build. I've built this simple homepage for my full stack web development bootcamp Future Full Stack. Our hero section has group text on the left and buttons, and on the right is a picture of me. Scrolling down, we have a how it works section, which contains a grid of icons and text. We then have a CTA section inside this blue box, and then a very simple footer at the bottom. So let's take a look at what we will learn through this project. We're going to be covering Tailwind installation. We're going to be using a whole variety of utility classes. We're going to be using some components so we can see how those work in Tailwind. And then finally, we're going to make our design fully responsive. So before we get started, let's do a quick walkthrough of Tailwind. Tailwind is available at tailwindcss.com. I'm going to head straight to Docs. Straight away, we're taken to Get Started with Tailwind, which provides information of different ways for installing it, which we're going to do soon. If I scroll down on the left, we have the core concepts, where we looked at utility first fundamentals earlier. And then we have a long list of all the different utilities. There's also a very powerful search box. So for example, if I want to look at margin properties, margin straight away comes up here, and I'm taken to the documentation about margin. And you can see compared to Bootstrap, there are just way more margin utilities. And that's because the aim of Tailwind is to give you everything you need so that you don't need to write custom CSS. And just a side comment, I just think these docs are just so well designed. For example, if I go to background color, which we'll be using in our project, you can see Tailwind out the box has a whole variety of beautiful colors to use. Anyway, I'm just a big fan of Tailwind's approach to design. So we've briefly looked at docs, let's now go look at components. So while Tailwind is a utility-first framework, it does also provide you with some components. You'll notice that this is actually on a different URL, tailwindui.com. If I go to components and scroll down, the components are organized into different categories. For example, we have a whole bunch of different page sections, like hero sections, CTA sections. And if I scroll down, there's different elements like banners. Now, as an example, let's go to pricing sections. I'm going to zoom out a bit. And you can see Tailwind provides us some different examples of pricing pages. And some of them are pretty comprehensive. Like this one has our 3 different pricing tiers with a table of the different features in each pricing tier. Anyways, there's a whole bunch to choose from here. And what I hope you're noticing is that these designs are absolutely fantastic. Now they're really easy to add to our project. We just go code and copy this to our clipboard and add it in. And we're going to be doing this inside our project, where we'll be copying in a component and customizing the Tailwind CSS so it better matches our design. Now, just a note, this is where Tailwind does make its money. Some of the components you do need to pay for. So the one we just looked at here, I can just straight away grab the code, whereas for other ones, it has this button, Get the Code, which takes me to a pricing page. Now, in addition to different page components, under templates, you can buy full pages. If I go to Browse Templates, I like this one here, Salient. You can see it costs $99, but look what you get. Again, this one does have a cost, but let's check it out. If I go Live Preview, you're able to get this full design written in Tailwind, which you can just copy into your project. And of course, you can further customize it using Tailwind's utility classes. All right, so let's get started on our project. The first thing we need to do is install Tailwind. I'm on the Tailwind CSS homepage. I'm going to go to Docs, and I'm straight away taken to the documentation on installation. Now, in a professional project, you're going to want to install Tailwind as a dependency in your project, using npm node package manager. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I've made this video as a complete beginner course. So at this point in your coding journey, I am assuming you have no idea what this is. Installing packages using npm is a topic I cover in my full stack bootcamp, which you can learn more about in the description below. But in a nutshell, what we are doing is actually installing the source files of Tailwind into our project, and it is the recommended thing to do. For those of you who know about npm, feel free to install it as a dependency in your project using the documentation here. But for this video, we'll be using the Tailwind Play CDN. This essentially lets us import a simple script tag that allows us to use Tailwind straight away. You can see here, the documentation says, the Play CDN is designed for development purposes only and is not the best choice for production. Development purposes just means for the purpose of building this locally on our device, whereas production is a live web application. So in a real project that's live on the internet, the Play CDN is not what you want to be using. You do want to install it properly with Node Package Manager. But besides the 2 different methods, the use of Tailwind we're going to be using in this project is the exact same as if you were using the npm install method here. So the only difference between these 2 is just how you install it. Once it's installed, it's the same Tailwind you're going to be working with. Okay, so let's go start a new project and get Tailwind installed into our project using the Play CDN. So I'm inside VS Code. I've created an empty folder on my desktop called Future Full Stack, which I'm just going to drag into the project now. I'm going to remove this welcome page. I'm just going to go add a new file and call it index.html. Like always, I'm just going to go grab the boilerplate. Let's update the title to Future Full Stack. And let's go install the Play CDN. All we do is copy this line of code and add it inside our head tag. I'm going to place it just above the title. All right, so I'll save. And just to get started, I'm going to add an H1 with the title Hello World. Let's go check this out in the browser. All right, we can see Hello World there. I'm going to zoom in quite a bit. And you'll see straight away that this Hello World is looking different to what it would look like with the default browser styling. Just to show you this, I'm going to comment out this script tag. I'll refresh. And here we are, back to the default browser styling. Okay, let's add this back in. I'll refresh, and you can see Tailwind has been successfully installed. You can see there's kind of been a CSS reset applied, where margin and padding has been stripped away, and our font style has changed. If you don't know what a CSS reset is, you can check out my video in the description below. Now we're going to come and remove this soon, but just so we can start getting comfortable with the use of Tailwind utility classes, let's go add some simple ones to this heading. Back inside the documentation, let's go change the font size. All I do is simply search font size in the search bar, click the result, and you can see here a systemized table of all the different font sizes. For example, the utility class TextLG has a font size of 1.125 rem, or 18 pixels, and a line height of 1.75 rem, or 28 pixels. Let's go add this text 3XL, which is a font size of 30 pixels. All I do is in the H1, I add a class and paste that utility. Let's go bold the text. I'll search font weight. Here the different utility classes are, with their corresponding properties. Let's give it a font bold, which is a font weight of 700. In the class, I just simply add that. So let's check these out in the browser. Our font size is now much larger and is bold. So you can see how Tailwind's utility classes makes it so easy to style different HTML elements. Alright, so looking back at our completed project, the first thing I want to go do is add our main page container. If I open up DevTools and click the device toggle icon, you can see we have this container, which is setting a maximum width for large screen sizes. And as I reduce the width of the browser, the main page container is keeping the content away from the edge of the screen. Okay, so in Tailwind, I'm going to search container. This is under layout. Now you can see there's just one container class. And on the right here, it shows you what's happening at different breakpoints. So for example, at the small breakpoint, that is at 640 pixels, the max width is set at 640 pixels, which means that for our container, the width is set at 640 pixels until we hit the next breakpoint at 768 pixels. So for example, at 700 pixels, which is between these two values, our container is going to have a width of 640 pixels. You can see that anything less than 640 pixels will just stretch the full width of the screen, because the width is set at 100 pixels. Now there's some important documentation on how to use the container. I want to highlight this sentence here. Note that unlike containers you might have used in other frameworks, Tailwind's container does not center itself automatically, and does not have any built-in horizontal padding. And it explains here how to center the container by using this MX auto utility. M stands for margin, X is for the X direction, that is left and right, and auto is the auto value. We're going to be looking at all the different margin properties a bit later, but hopefully this one is fairly intuitive. It's setting an X direction margin to auto, which is something we always need to do when writing our own CSS for a container. Now, as I mentioned earlier, for less than 640 pixels has a width of 100%. Now for my containers, I always like to have a little bit of extra space left and right. So the documentation says we just need to go and add a small padding value. And we'll see how to do this in a second. So first up, I'm just going to copy the container utility class and the MX auto utility class. Inside our project, I'm going to create a new div. I'll add class and paste in those utilities. And I'm just going to put my H1 inside our main container. All right, back on the page, I'll refresh, and you can see our hello world has moved in slightly. If I open up DevTools, you'll see that when I select the H1, the blue box is no longer going right up to the left and right edge. And this shows how our container has been activated. Now, as I mentioned earlier, for smaller screens, less than 640 pixels, the container is going to stretch to the full width of the page. So you can see here at 553 pixels, our H1 is going right up to the edge of the page. Now to fix this, I'm just going to go add some small padding value left and right, just like the documentation suggests we do. So I'm going to go search, padding, I'll click this. Now for padding, there's a whole long list of different sizes. Now the way these are structured is that there's different characters followed by a hyphen and then a number. So let's look at some common padding utilities we're going to be using. Just the value P represents padding on all four sides. The value 0 representing 0 pixels. P followed by X is padding in the X direction, that is padding left and padding right. 0 representing the value left and right. PY is in the Y direction, so padding top, padding bottom. We have padding top, padding right, padding bottom, and padding left. And you can see this pattern is repeated for different values. So for example, P3 represents padding in all directions of 0.75 rem, which is 12 pixels. And we have the same thing for the other padding utilities. For example, PY3 is padding in the y direction, top and bottom, of the same value 0.75 rem. And if I scroll down, you'll see we're provided with a long list of values to avoid us ever having to write our own custom CSS. So for example, we go up to the value P96, which is 24 rem or 384 pixels. So this long list of values should cover us for most cases. And just to show you, margin works the exact same way. It's the same notation, but instead of a P, we have an M, where the second character, like X and Y, represent left and right and top and bottom, and the numerical value is the exact same, where, for example, 3 is 0.75 rem or 12 pixels. Okay, let's jump back to padding. I want to go just add a small left and right value, so that's going to be px, and let's use px5. That is 1.25 rem left and right. So back inside our projects, I'm just going to paste that utility. Okay, let's check it out in the browser. I'll refresh, and you'll now see we have a small padding value, which looks great on small screens. Now this padding value is still being applied on larger screens. You can see it in green over here. Now we don't really need that, and we will be removing this padding for larger screen sizes when we look at responsive design. Alright, so let's start working on our main hero section. So the first thing I want to go do is define the height of the hero section, which is set at 100 view height units. So all of this content is above the fold. In Tailwind, I'm going to search height, and the first thing I want you to notice is that these same numerical values are being used for the height property. For example, h3 is 0.75 rem, which is the same value that was on padding and margin. And this is what I said earlier about Tailwind being very systemized. This numerical value 3 is used as 0.75 for different properties throughout Tailwind. I'm going to scroll down, and you can see this h screen value is the height of 100 view height units. So I'm going to grab this utility. Back inside our project, let's go add the HTML for our hero section. I'm going to remove this h1. I'm going to add the semantic header tag. I'm then going to add a section tag for our hero section. Let's add class here, and I'm going to add the utility hScreen. So this section is 100 view height units. Now, just so we can see it in the browser, let's go add some background color. In Tailwind, I'll search background color. And for now, it doesn't matter what color we use. I just want to be able to see our hero section. So I'll just choose BG Orange 500, and I'll paste that in our class. Okay, let's check this out in the browser. I'll refresh, and you can see we now have our orange background color. And we can see the 100 view height is working because as I increase and decrease the height of the browser, the hero section is stretching the same height. Okay, so let's now go set up the structure for this group text and image. To do that, I'm going to be using CSS Grid. This is a simple grid with 2 columns and 1 row. So to show you how grid works, I'm just going to go grab 2 divs, which will be our 2 grid items. So in the Tailwind documentation, let's now go use this left navigation bar. I'm going to scroll up to Flexbox and Grid, and I'm straight away going to go to Grid Template Columns. So here are all the utilities for setting different columns. Now we're going to use grid cols 2, which simply sets 2 grid columns, each with 1 fractional unit. If I scroll down, you'll see that to use this, we also need to use the grid utility to activate grid. So I'm just going to copy this. Back in our project, I'm going to come add grid, and then I'm going to paste in grid cols 2. Now, just so we can see these 2 columns, I'm going to cut the BG Orange 500 color. I'm going to come and add it onto this column. I'm going to add another class, paste it, and just increment the value to 600, which will be another shade of orange. So what we should see now are 2 equal columns with slightly different orange background colors. Let's check it out in the browser. So I'll refresh, and you can see we now have our 2 columns, each set with 1 fractional unit, so they're each taking up 50% of the available width. Alright, so let's start adding in the content for our hero section. Now the hero section contains 2 images, the logo over here, and me standing with my laptop. So the first thing I want to do in our project is create a new folder called Images. Now I've made these available for you to download in the description, and I'm just going to drag them across into the Images folder. So here we have a PNG with me holding my laptop and the Future Full Stack logo. So in the left column, we have a logo, heading text, paragraph text, and 2 buttons, and on the right, we have a single image. Now, just so you can follow along, all text content is available in a Google Doc in the description below, and I'm just going to be copying and pasting it from my clipboard. All right, for now, I'm just going to leave these background colors so we can better see our columns. Inside the first column, I'm going to grab the image tag and add the logo by going images/logo.svg, and I'll just give this the alt text logo. The next element I'm going to add is an H1, and I'm just going to copy in the content for the H1. The next element will be a paragraph, and I'm just going to paste in the content. We then had 2 buttons. I'm going to structure these inside an unordered list. It'll contain 2 list items for our buttons. I'll add an anchor tag. As I have no other pages, I'm just going to put the pound symbol as the href value. The text for the first button was get started. I'll copy this anchor tag, paste it in our second list item, and the text over here was learn more. All right, so that's our first column done. For our second column, I'm going to remove the div and just add our image, as that is the only grid item. For the source, I'll go to images, and this is Dan holding his laptop. For the alt text, I'm just going to put Dan holding laptop. Okay, the final thing I want to do is just remove this background color, as we no longer need it. So let's check this out. I'll refresh, and we now have all the content on the page inside our 2 grid columns. Now, our images are obviously way too big, and I also want you to notice our text is the same size and style. Our H1 is no different to our paragraph. So now we need to go resize our images and go apply some text utility classes, as well as make our anchor tag actually look like buttons. All right, so let's first go sort out the sizing of our images. Inside Tailwind, I'm going to search for width. And just like height, we have the same systemized notation, where instead of H, we have W followed by numerical values. For the logo, I want to set its width as 192 pixels, or 12 rem. So I'm just going to copy this utility. Inside the image, I'm going to add class and set W48. I'll refresh, and you can see our image is now a much more appropriate size. Let's go sort out the image of me holding my laptop, as right now it's way too big. Now with this image, I don't want to set a fixed size. I rather want it to be a proportion of the column it is in. So to do that, I want to be using a percentage width value. You can see here how it works. For example, if you want to set a width to 1/3 of a container, you would use W-1/3. Now I want my image to be 3/4 or 75%. I'm simply going to copy this utility here. On the image, I'm going to add a class and paste in that value. All right, let's check it out. So our image has now reduced to 75% the width of the grid column. Next up, let's go and align our grid items. On the left column, our text has been vertically centered, and in the right column, our image has been horizontally centered. So back inside the documentation, I'm going to scroll to Flexbox and Grid, and we know that to center grid items inside grid cells, along the row axis, we're using justify items, and along the column axis, we're using align items. So let's go to justify items. So for justify items, we want to center our content along the row axis. So I'll grab justify item center. In our HTML file, I'm going to come and add that onto our main section container, where we're defining our grid. Back in our page, I'll refresh and watch how the image is going to shift to the middle of this column. So you'll see the image is now horizontally centered. Now, because justify items was applied to the entire grid, the div containing all of this content has also been centered, but it has no effect because the div is a block level element expanding the full width of the column. Just to show you this in DevTools, if I come and select this div, you'll see that its width in blue is the full width of the grid column. So justify item center is being applied here to center the div, but because the div is the same width as the column, there's no space to move, so nothing happens. Whereas the image, you can see its width is smaller than the width of this column. That is, this grid item has a smaller width than this grid cell. So there is space for this grid item, the image, to center horizontally inside the grid cell. All right, let's go center vertically using the align items property. To set align item center, we're going to use the utility class item center. I'll copy that and add it onto our grid container. All right, I'll refresh and watch how both our image and div containing all this content vertically centers on the page. Okay, great, this is looking a lot better. Now applying align item center did center both the container, because you can see its vertical height is a lot smaller than the height of the column, and the image, because the image height is also less than the height of the column. That is, both these grid items have a height that is less than their respective grid cells. All right, so next up, let's go handle applying different font styles to our heading and paragraph. So it ends up looking like this. Now the way I want to do this is I first want to go set up our base font style. I'm going to come and add this as a class onto the body tag. This is a fairly common approach, where we come and apply a base font style, which will be applied by default to all text elements through inheritance on the body tag. And then for headings, we go and customize those individually. So back in the docs, Let's first go handle the font size. I'll search font size, and I want our base font size to be 18 pixels. That is 1.125 rem. So I'll copy this class. I'll come on the body tag, add class, and paste in that utility. Next up, let's go handle the font weight. I want our base font size to have a font weight of 400, which is just normal weight. So I'll copy this and add it to our class. The final text property I want to add is the color. I'll search color. Under typography, we have text color. And for our base color, I want to use this value of text slate 600. Now Tailwind provides some really nice base gray colors. There's slate, gray, zinc, neutral, and stone. So you have a whole variety to choose from. I'll copy text slate 600 and I'll add it into our project. All right, so let's check this out so far. I'll refresh and you'll see all our text, including the heading, paragraph, and anchor tags, have had those text styles applied because I've added it as a global style to the body tag and it's all been inherited. So our paragraph is done through the base font style, but let's go now sort out our heading. I'll first go back to font size. For our H1, I want our text to be quite large, at 60 pixels. So I'll copy text 6XL. On our H1, I'm going to add a class and paste in that font size. Let's go change the font weight. I want our headings to be bold with a weight of 700. So I'll copy this and add it onto our class. For the color, I want to use a darker shade of our base text slate 600 color. So I'm going to choose 800. I'll copy this and add it onto our class. Now the last thing I want to do is tighten up the letter spacing. I'll search letter spacing, and I want to have a small negative value, like -0.25 rem. So I'll copy this class, tracking tight, and I'll add it onto our H1. All right, let's check this out on our page. I'll refresh, and you can see this heading is looking great. All right, next up, let's go style these buttons. We want them to look like this, where the buttons are placed next to each other horizontally. So let's go first implement the layout and get them next to each other using Flexbox. Inside the documentation, I'm going to scroll up to Flex Direction. Now for us, our buttons are going to be in a row, which is just the default value, so we don't actually need to use a class like Flex Row. But here you can see all 4 Flex Direction values. Now you can see with Flexbox, just like Grid, we need to use the Flex Utility class to activate it. So on the left menu here, you can see Gap. And just like margin, padding, width, and height, we're back to the same systemized approach, where different characters and values represent different directions and space units. Now for Flexbox, I just want to come and add a small gap value of 1.5 rem, which is 24 pixels. You can see gap 6 is the one to use, whereas gap X and gaps Y are specifically used inside Grid. So I'll copy this utility. All right, so in our project, I want our unordered list to be our Flex container, and our 2 list items are the Flex items. So let's go and add a class. I'll add Flex to make this a Flex container, and I'll paste in gap 6. I'll refresh, and you can see our anchor tags are now next to each other, with a small gap value between them. And I didn't need to set a Flex direction, because by default, our main axis is in row going from left to right. All right, let's now go style these 2 buttons. The first thing I want to do is add a blue background color to this primary button. Inside the documentation, I'll search background color. I'm going to scroll down to the blue color, and I'm going to select BG Sky 500. On our anchor tag, I'm going to come and add a class and paste in that utility. While I'm here, I also want to set the hover state. Inside the documentation, I'm going to scroll up to core concepts where it says hover focus and other states. You can see this is really easy to do. All we do is put the word hover with a colon and then the color we want it to be. So back inside the project, I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to add the word hover, add a colon, paste in that style, and just change it to a darker shade of 700. Okay, the next thing I want to do is make the text color white. So I'll search color, text color, and you can see over here, text white sets a white color. So I'll copy that and add it onto this class. Okay, let's check this out so far. I'll refresh, and you can see the button is starting to take form. You'll see when I hover over it, the color also changes. So to finish this off, let's go and add some padding around it and round the corners. So I'll search padding. Now the rule of thumb for button padding is we want our width to be double the height. So I'm going to add padding left and right of 32 pixels or 2 rem, which is this px value here. I'll copy it and add it onto our class. Now, half the height is going to be PY4. I'll scroll up, and you can see PY4 has a padding top and bottom of 1 rem. So I'll copy this and paste it in our class. Now the final thing we need to do is add some border radius. So I'm going to come here and search border radius. I just want a small border radius of say 6 pixels. So I'm going to copy rounded MD for medium. So in our project, I'll just paste that class. All right, let's check this out. I'll refresh, and you'll see our button is now complete. So let's talk about what's happening here, where this padding is kind of overlapping the content above. This happens when you apply box model properties like padding onto an inline element, like an anchor tag. They just apply kind of weirdly, and to fix this, we convert our inline element into an inline block. If this behavior is new to you, you can learn more about it in the display property video in the description below. So in Tailwind, I'm going to search inline block. This is handled in the display property. And you can see here we have display inline block. So I'm going to copy this class. And just a note, in this display property, you can also see where we're grabbing flex from and where we're grabbing grid from. Okay, so on our anchor tag, I'm just going to come and add inline block. On our page, I'll refresh, and you'll see that fixes the issue. All right, let's now go and style our secondary button here. So I'm going to come and add a class. For the background color, I'm going to use the same slate as we use in our text, but I'm going to give it a lighter color of 400. We'll then do the hover state by setting hover : BG slate, and I'll give it a value of 500 for the hover state. I want the text to be white, so we'll use text white like we used above. And then I'm just going to copy the same padding values, rounded values, and also make it inline block. All right, that's the work done. I'll refresh, and we now have a good-looking secondary button with a hover state. All right, the last thing we need to do on the hero section is just create some vertical spacing between this content by adding in some margin. I'll search margin, and I'm going to use the margin bottom property on our different elements. You can see that's our class here, MB for margin bottom. Inside our left column, on the image, I'm going to go add some margin bottom 4. I'll copy this. I'm going to add the same margin bottom onto our heading. And then for our paragraph, I'm going to add margin bottom of 8, as I want to create more space between these elements and our buttons. Okay, I'll refresh and watch how our content spreads out horizontally. All right, nice. That's our hero section done. So moving across to the completed project, let's now go handle this how it works section. For this section, I'm actually going to be using one of Tailwind's components, so I can show you how that works and how we can go modify it to fit our exact design. In the Tailwind documentation, I'm going to head to Components. I'll click this link here. I'm going to scroll down, and in Page Sections, I'm going to go to Feature Sections. Tailwind gives us a few feature sections we can copy straight into our project, as well as some paid ones down here. For our project, I'm just going to be using this feature section here. If I click Code, you can see the underlying code that will be copied into our project. And I just click this clipboard icon over here. All right, heading back to our HTML file. I'm going to first set up the HTML structure by grabbing the main tag, and then I'm going to grab a section tag for the hero section. I'll then paste in the page section sitting in my clipboard. Okay, so just zooming out a bit, you can see all this code is using Tailwind utility classes to style the how it works section. Let's go check it out in the browser. I'll refresh, and you can see down here, we have the how it works section. We have the feature section from Tailwind's components. So now what we're going to do is modify some of the styles so it better matches the styles in our project. For example, the primary color used here is this purple color, and we want to change that to our primary blue color. Okay, let's work top down and start modifying this component. The first thing I want to do is actually just get rid of this small heading. That isn't really in line with our style, and on the final project, we don't have it. So in the HTML file, I'm going to come here and just remove this H2, which says deploy faster. I'll refresh and you'll see it's disappeared. Now, because that was a heading tag, the component puts this as a paragraph. That no longer makes sense in our markup, so I just want to go convert this to an H2. So you can see here the paragraph. Let's just go convert this to an H2. Okay, I'll refresh and there's no change, but this is now a better markup. So let's now take care of the styles on this heading. We'll go through these utilities one by one. MT2 is margin top 2, which I'm going to leave. We then have this text pretty style. So let's go see what that is. I'll head back to the Tailwind documentation and I'll just search text pretty. So you can see here under text wrap, text pretty sets text wrap to pretty. So what is this pretty value? I'm going to scroll down and you can see it says use text pretty to prevent orphans, which is a single word on its own line at the end of a text block. So this is quite a cool property. You can see this heading, Beloved Manhattan Soup Stand closes. The word stand could fit over here, but to make this text more pretty, the word stand is being pushed onto the second line. And this just looks a lot nicer than having a single word on a line by itself. So I'm going to leave this utility as it is. Now text 4XL, to work out if that's appropriate, let's go compare this to our H1. Over there, we're using text 6XL. So this is actually fine, because we want our H1 to be bigger than our H2, so text 4XL is appropriate. Now the font weight is being set by font semi-bold. I do want to update this to the same font weight we use in our H1, as I like my font weights for headings to be consistent. So I'll copy this utility here, and I'll replace it with font bold. Tracking tight, we also used on our H1, which just reduces the letter spacing. Text gray 900 is the text color, which we do want to update to our text color we set on our H1 of text slate 800. So I'll copy that, I'll remove this and paste it there. Now these two classes here, SM with a colon, text 5XL, and LG with a colon, text balance, has to do with responsive design, so that this heading is responsive. Responsive design is something we're going to be looking at towards the end of this project. And just a note, we're going to have to go make some different elements in here responsive as well. But to make things a bit simpler, for now I just want to ignore it. So in this markup, anytime you see something with a colon after it, like LG colon or SM colon, just ignore it for now. We will be looking at a great length a bit later, but just know for now, this is to ensure our elements are responsive. So let's check out what we've done so far in the browser. I'll refresh, and you can see now this H2 is looking much more like our H1 here. Next up, let's go handle this paragraph. MT6 is margin top 6, which I'll just leave for now. Now in our project, we're setting the base text properties on our body class so that elements like the paragraph will just inherit these. So I'm actually just going to go remove these styles over here. Checking back in our project, this paragraph is now the same style as this paragraph here. So next up, let's go handle the content inside this grid. All right, so back inside our HTML file, let's go identify the different features. I'm going to zoom out a bit. And you can see over here, we have this div with the opening tag here and the closing tag here. And this unit contains the content for each feature and is repeated for each feature. Now, before we start playing around with this, there are some HTML elements here which aren't that commonly used. You can see we have this DL tag, which wraps all 4 features. This DT tag, which wraps the icon SVG and the title of the feature. And then this DD tag, which is kind of like the paragraph text. So what are these tags? So let's quickly check them out on MDN docs. The DL tag is the description list element. The documentation says, the DL HTML element represents a description list. The element encloses a list of groups of terms specified by using the DT element and description provided by the DD element. So you can see in this sample markup here, we have a main DL wrapper tag, which is the definition list. You can think of this as like an unordered list tag. And instead of list items, we have repeating groups of DT and DD tags, where DT is a definition term, which in our final design might be more like a heading, and a DD tag, which is a definition description, which in a final page is more like a paragraph. So that's what those tags are. In all honesty, you could just replace your DL, DTs, and DDs with divs. But the reason Tailwind isn't doing that is they want to provide a bit more semantic meaning to this section, because you can see there already are a lot of divs being used for different layout goals. So don't let these more uncommon tags throw you off. Tailwind are just using them for a better semantic approach. So once again, we can see this DT tag contains the icon and the heading text, and this DD tag contains what is like the paragraph text. We will update the actual content of that icon, but for now, let's just go change the color. The color is actually being defined on this div here, where it has BG Indigo 600. Let's go update that to our primary color of Sky 500. I'll copy this utility there. I'll remove this and paste it there. So that will change the color, and the actual icon we're going to go update soon. For this text push to deploy, it's being controlled by the utilities in here. So I'm going to remove this and replace it with text LG. On our H2, we're using 4XL, and for this heading, I want to use a bit of a smaller text size. In the Tailwind documentation, if I search font size, text LG is 1.125 rem, or 18 pixels. Next up, I want to replace font semi-bold with font bold, and then update the text color to the heading text color of Text Slate 800. So I'll copy that, remove this, and paste this there. All right, let's go handle the DD tag. Because this is still a text element, it is going to inherit the base text properties we set on our body tag. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to keep margin top 2 and just remove these two properties here, and the base properties will be inherited. So let's check this out in the browser. I'll refresh, and you can see how this now compares to the others, where the colors and styles are a lot more in line with what we did in the hero section. All right, let's now just go copy this for the other 3 features. I'm going to zoom out a bit, and I'm just going to copy this entire div and replace it with each of the divs over here. So I'll remove that, paste this there. For the next div, I'll remove that, paste it again. And for the 4th one, I'll remove that and paste it here. Let's jump back to the browser and make sure this worked. I'll refresh, and you can now see all our styles have been applied. So now let's just update the text content. So we have here how it works, and this text content over here. In our markup, this H2 now needs to become how it works. And this paragraph text, I'm just going to replace with what I have sitting in my clipboard. Okay, I'll refresh, and you can see this is now updated. For the feature section, I'm just going to copy what I have in my clipboard. The heading over here is high quality. And the DD, which is like the paragraph text, I'm just going to copy from my clipboard. All right, I'll refresh, and you can see this content has now changed. Now, just to avoid boring you, I am just going to go update the other 3 in the same way. Okay, so in the markup, I've gone ahead and updated all of that. On the page, I'll refresh, and you can see all our content is now updated. All right, so the final thing we need to do for this section is just go update our icons. Now, unfortunately, Tailwind doesn't provide an out-of-the-box solution for icons, so we need to go use another tool. One of my favorite tools is Ion Icons, and we're going to see how easy it is to import them into our project. If I click Usage, all we need to do is copy these 2 script tags and place them near the end of the page right before your closing body tag. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of our page, and just before our closing body tag, I'm going to paste these 2 script tags. So this now gives us access to Ion Icons, and let's go now add them into our project. I'm going to click Icons, and for this first icon, I have this play button. So I'm going to search play. It's this one over here. When I click it, you'll see I get this web component code, and all I need to do is copy it and paste it in our project. The current icon is an SVG, which I'm just going to comment out for now. I'm going to paste in our special Ion icon, and let's refresh to see what we get. I'll refresh, and you can see the icon is imported, but the size and color are a bit wrong. Our other icons are a bit larger and are white. So all we do is comment out a class onto this. You can see the original SVG had a size of 6, so I'm just going to copy that inside our class, and the text color was white. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it here. Okay, I'll refresh, and you can see now our icon is much more in line with the original style, and this is looking great. Back in the HTML, I'm just going to go remove this SVG. Now, you also could have downloaded this icon as an SVG and done it that way, but the whole beauty of Ion Icon is it gives you this simple web component that's very concise, and it's very easy just to pop on some Tailwind utility classes. Okay, the other icons I have are a magnifying glass, this list, and this piece of paper. So if I search here, search, there's the magnifying glass, list, there's the list, and paper, there's the folded paper. And just to avoid boring you, I'm going to import them into the project and update the styles the exact same way. All right, so I've gone ahead and replaced all the SVGs with our Ion icons, like the magnifying glass for detailed, and added in the same class I applied on the first one we did. So I'll refresh, and our icons are now successfully imported. All right, so that's the How It Works section complete. So far we've done our hero section and our How It Works section, and our page is starting to look great. All right, so next up, let's go handle the CTA card down here. Back in our HTML file, I'm first going to go set up the HTML structure for this. I'll grab a section tag. Inside the section tag, I'm going to add a single div, which will be a container for the CTA card. I'll add an H2, which has the text, "It's time to boost your career." I'll then add a paragraph, which has the text, "Your new future is one click away." And then I'll just add an anchor tag with the text, "Get started." And I'm just going to put a pound symbol here for now. So first up, let's go handle the different font styling. For the H2, I'm just going to copy the utilities in our H2 in the How It Works section. I don't need margin top. I'm going to copy all of these and just ignore these responsive utilities, and we'll add those in a bit later. So I'll come down here, add a class, and paste in those properties. For the paragraph, I'm actually not going to add any styles because these are all going to be inherited by the body tag. So let's check this out so far. I'll refresh, and you can see down here, the content is starting to appear. We have our H2 and paragraph, which has styling consistent with the rest of the page. Let's now go handle the Get Started button. You can see the background color of the button is white, and the text is blue, which is the opposite of the primary button. For now, I'm just going to copy the styles on our primary button over here. I'll paste it here, and I will come and update this soon once we apply blue background color onto the card. So I'll refresh, and you can see our blue button is down here. Let's go define this blue card. On our div, I'm going to add a class. I'm going to add our primary background color, which is BG Sky 500. I then want to add some width to this card. In the documentation, I'm going to search max width. I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to set a maximum width of 48 rem, or 768 pixels. So I'll copy that utility class, and I'll paste it over here. I want the corners to be rounded, so I'm going to use rounded-MD, which is the same rounding on our buttons over here. I'm then going to add some padding all the way around the card. I'll use the padding, and I'm going to set a value of 12. P12 corresponds to 3 rems or 48 pixels of padding all around the card. Okay, so let's check out our work so far. I'll refresh, and you can see the card is starting to come together. Let's go fix up some of the styling now, as we want all our text to be white and the button to be white. So what I'm going to do is set text white onto the div over here, so the white color is inherited by our different text properties. I'm also going to come and remove text slate 800 here, as we no longer need that. For the button, I want the background color to now be white, and I want the text color to be Sky 500. I'm just going to leave the hover background color as Sky 700. All right, so let's check this out. I'll refresh. Okay, this is looking good. I've just noticed a small mistake where this text color should be blue. And that's being caused by not removing this text white property over here. So I'll remove that. So now the color will be blue. All right, this is looking great. Now, before we come and center the entire card, I just want to center these text elements inside the card. So to easily do that, on our div, I'm just going to come and add the utility text center, which will center both our block elements, our H2 and paragraph, and our inline element, the anchor tag. Ordinarily, when you apply text center onto an anchor tag, it doesn't work. But when you apply text center onto a parent container, it will center both block and inline elements inside the container. So I'll refresh, and you'll see this is all nicely centered. Okay, so the final thing we need to do is now center this entire card into the middle of the page. To achieve that, I'm going to use Flexbox. I want to center this entire div. So I'm going to add a class. I'll activate Flexbox by using the utility Flex. This now makes the entire section a Flex container, and this single div a Flex item. So by default, our main axis is running from left to right in row. And we know that to shift our Flex item along the main axis, we need to use the Justify Content property. Let's head to the documentation. So I'll search Justify Content, and we want to center it. So Justify Content Center, where Justify Center is the utility we want to use. So I'll copy that and paste it over here. Okay, let's jump back to the page and refresh. And you can see now our card is nicely centered. Now the last thing I want to do is just add a bit of margin between the heading and paragraph and button. On the H2, I'm just going to add a margin bottom value of 4, and I'll use the same value on our paragraph. Okay, I'll refresh, and now there's just a bit more extra space in our card. Okay, the last thing I want to do is just create quite a bit of white space between our CTA section and where our footer will be. On the section, I'm just going to add a margin bottom of 64, which is 15 rems or 240 pixels. I'll refresh, and we now have some white space between our CTA card and the bottom of the page. Okay, the final thing we need to take care of is just this very simple footer down the bottom. In our HTML, I'm going to grab the footer semantic element. I'm just going to paste in the content from my clipboard, and I'm simply going to add the class text center to center this text on the page. I'll refresh, and there we have our very simple footer. All right, so this page is now finished for desktop. We have our hero section, our how it works section, our CTA card, and simple footer. All right, so we're up to the final stage of the project, where we're going to make our page responsive. So let's go check out our page at different screen sizes to identify some issues. I'm going to open up DevTools. I'm going to click on the toggle device icon over here. And let's start with the hero section. I'm going to reduce the width of the browser. And you can see this is starting to look really bad. For smaller screen sizes like this, we want our image to pop below. You can also see the font size is just way too big. And because of this layout issue, it's causing issues on the How It Works section below, where this is now appearing on top of it. Now the How It Works section is actually looking really good. This is because this page section is already built as a responsive design. So there's not much we need to do here. We will take a look at the code to see how this is working. Scrolling down to the bottom of the page, the CTA section, we want to look at reducing some of the padding, as this is just getting a bit too busy. And I'll also want to reduce the margin between the CTA and the footer, because for screen sizes like this, it's just too big. So let's go check out how responsive design works in Tailwind. I'm going to head to the documentation. On this left navigation bar, under core concepts, I'm going to go to responsive design. Looking at this sentence here, every utility class in Tailwind can be applied conditionally at different breakpoints, which makes it a piece of cake to build complex responsive interfaces without ever leaving your HTML. So this is really cool. Every single utility class in Tailwind can be made responsive, and working with responsive design in Tailwind is really straightforward. Tailwind uses a set of predefined breakpoints, which you can see in this table here. These represent common screen sizes like small, medium, large, and extra large. Tailwind follows a mobile-first approach to responsive design. You'll see this mentioned in the docs. By default, Tailwind uses a mobile-first breakpoint system. This means that by default, styles are applied to mobile devices, and then we add classes for larger screens as needed. So let's take a look at an example of this. Let's say on mobile, we want our margin bottom to be 2, so MB2. We would apply MB2 by default, and then say on a large screen, that is when we hit 1024 pixels, we want our margin bottom to increase to 5. So we would write LG:MB5. And what that's saying is that when we hit 1024 pixels, increase the margin bottom to 5. And that will then just apply for everything above 1024 pixels, and everything below 1024 pixels will just be the default margin bottom we applied. So let's now go use these breakpoints in our design. Okay, the first thing I want to do is change our base text to be smaller on smaller screens. I want the default case to be text-MD, so medium text by default. And then when we hit medium screens, I want the text to go large. So once again, on smaller screens, our text is going to be medium. But then when we hit the medium breakpoint, which is 768 pixels, our text is then going to change to large. Let's check this out in the browser. I'll refresh. Now watch what happens to this paragraph text when I go past 768 pixels. So it is subtle, but it has changed font size. All right, the next thing I want to go sort out is that on our main container, the content is butting up right against the left here. For smaller screens, we're just going to go add a little bit of horizontal padding. So here's our container. Taking a mobile-first approach, I'm going to go add some padding in the X direction of 5. When I then hit medium screens, I want the padding to change to 0. So once again, this is reading as, by default, apply a padding of 5, but then when we hit the medium breakpoint, which is 768 pixels, change the padding to 0. That is, remove the padding. So let's check this out in the browser. I'll refresh, and you can see now we have some padding left and right. If I select the div, you can see in green, and go to the box model, you can see the padding of 20 pixels applied left and right. And then when I increase the browser, you can see the padding disappears. Okay, next up, let's go sort out our grid so that the image appears below the grouped text. For our hero section, the grid columns are being set by grid cols 2. I only want our page to have 2 columns at the medium breakpoint. So I'm going to put MD: grid cols 2, which means that by default, for screen sizes less than 768 pixels, because we're not defining any grid cols, it means our grid items are just going to be stacked in a single column. So let's check this out. I'll refresh, and this is looking way better. Our image is now appearing below our text. All right, so next up, let's go sort out this issue here. The reason this is happening is because we've set 100 view heights onto our hero section, and this content is just seeing the 100 view heights. So from the How It Works section point of view, it thinks I need to start at 100 view heights, which is actually now overlapping the hero section content. On our hero section, we have this HScreen utility, which is setting the 100 view heights, but I only want that to come on medium screens. So I'm going to add MD_HScreen. So what this means is that by default, we don't have 100 view height set, but when we hit the medium breakpoint, 100 view heights is being set. So let's check this out. I'll refresh. So on this screen size, our hero section does not have 100 view heights. So the how it works section just appears below. And then when we go above 768 pixels, the hero section now does have 100 view height units. All right, the last thing I want to do on the hero section is just reduce the font size of our H1 on smaller screen sizes. Our H1 currently has a text size of 6XL. I want this only to start at medium screens, so I'm going to add MD. And then by default, I want our H1 to be 4XL. Let's check this out. I'll refresh. You can see the heading looks a lot better now. And when I increase the width of the browser, it goes back to 6XL. Now, one thing I've just noticed that I'd also like to correct is that on our main container, I'd like to add a little bit of vertical padding as well, so that the future full stack logo is not butting up right against the edge here. So I'm actually just going to remove the X, so that's padding in all directions for smaller screen sizes. And then on medium and above, I'm just going to remove the X so that we remove all the padding. I'll save, let's refresh. And now you can see we have some vertical padding as well. And that padding will disappear above the medium breakpoint. Okay, our hero section is looking good. Now, as I mentioned, the how it works section already comes fully responsive. So let's go check this out in the code. So I'm in the how it works section, and I'm not going to go line by line and show you every single responsive query, as I just don't want to bore you. But let's go identify a few to see how they're working. On this div here, we have text center being applied for large screens and above. This text center is being inherited by our H2 and paragraph. So what this means is that on smaller screen sizes, our text is going to be aligned left by default, and then on larger screens and above, it's going to be centered. Let's check this out. You can see the heading and paragraph are aligned left, and when I increase the width of the browser to a large screen size and above, the heading and paragraph become centered. You can see our H2 over here, by default, is text 4XL, and then when we hit the small breakpoint, it changes to 5XL. Over here, we also have this text balance utility being applied on larger screens and above. Now in the docs, let's check out what text balance is. You can see here, use text balance to distribute the text evenly across each line. You can see in this example here, if you didn't apply text balance, on the first line, this would likely read, Beloved Manhattan Soup Stand, and then the word closes would just be on its own line, looking a bit unbalanced. So text balance nicely distributes the text content onto two lines when the text wraps. Now in our design, this isn't really relevant because our text isn't that long. But if it was longer, I'm just going to copy and paste this a few times. Let's see how this works. I'll refresh. And you can see that how it works is being applied nicely across two lines for larger screen sizes. When I reduce the width of the browser, it just goes back to the default behavior. Okay, I'm just going to change that back. Now there are quite a few instances of responsive design being applied, like over here, down here, and in a few other places. Now, from what I've taught already, you should be able to understand what each of these are doing, so feel free to go check them all out yourself. But the main thing here is that a Tailwind section comes responsive out of the box. All right, the last thing we need to take care of now is the bottom part of our page. All I want to do here is remove some padding on smaller screen sizes and just reduce the amount of margin between our CTA and our footer. So back in our code, I'm on the CTA section. At the moment, we're applying padding 12 all the way around. Let's go apply that only on medium screen sizes and above. And by default, let's just apply padding 4. So let's check this out. I'll refresh. And you can see this just looks a bit tighter. And on medium screen sizes and above, the padding increases. Now, just to show you an example of how you could apply 3 different breakpoints, we could have padding 4 as our default case. And then for the small breakpoint, I'm going to add a padding value of 8. So the way we read this is as follows. By default, we have padding 4. When we then hit the small breakpoint, which is 640 pixels, our padding changes to 8. And then when we hit the medium breakpoint, our padding changes to 12. So in other words, from 0 to 640 pixels, our padding is 4. From 640 pixels to 768 pixels, our padding is 8. And then from 768 pixels and above, our padding is 12. So here's an example of how you can apply multiple breakpoints to your single property. So let's check this out. So on this screen size, our padding will be 12. I'm now going to go to a value between 640 pixels and 768 pixels. So over here, our padding will be 8. And then above 768 pixels, our padding changes to 12. All right, the last thing I want to do is just go sort out this margin. On our CTA section, we're currently applying a margin bottom of 64. Let's go apply a margin bottom of 8 by default. And then for medium screens, we'll change it to 64. Let's check this out. I'll refresh. And you can see on smaller screens, this is a lot tighter. And when I increase, the margin significantly increases. Okay, nice work. This is the project done. You now have an incredibly solid foundation in Tailwind CSS. If you enjoyed this style of teaching and are looking at mastering CSS, you can join me in my CSS full course, which is available for free on my channel. It's the world's most detailed CSS full course designed for complete beginners and covers everything you need to know to code CSS at a professional level. Join me today and also make sure to subscribe to my channel to stay in the loop with new releases. See you in the CSS full course.